Good morning. Let us start.
Good morning, sir.
Good
Good
morning,
morning.
sir. Good morning, sir.
On the last class, we started this introduction to machine learning, and we had very little time. That's why actually we just mentioned different types of machine learning. And I hope up to this one, you do not have any question. Do you able to see my slide, and am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you very much. So grossly, we categorized it into three classes: supervised, unsupervised, and reinforcement, based upon the experience or the data through which we are building the model or the knowledge. As I mentioned, that if we are learning from a known or labeled data set, then that kind of learning is called as the supervised learning. But it might be the case that we do not have the proper labeling of the information. In that case, we have to go for some unsupervised learning. So when we will go into details, or we will use some application of it, then you will understand more clearly about the supervised and unsupervised. And third kind that we will not cover in this course, actually we will give just the definition only. There is a separate course is required for this. That is called as the reinforcement learning. In the reinforcement learning, there is an agent or decision maker or a body which interacts with the environment, and the result of the interaction is denoted by some reward. As I mentioned in the last class, let us not talk about failure and success, just talk about the reward. And reward may vary from, say, very low to high. Low indicates not favorable interaction with the environment, and high indicates favorable interaction. And that way I will keep on choosing that what is the best for me. That is the reinforcement learning. Now, what are the different steps of the machine learning process? First step, of course, is the collection of the data, or gathering the instances, samples, or experience, whatever you will be comfortable to say. This data collection is very important step. The reason is very simple. As the diversity in the data will increase, then your learning will be robust. As the size of the data set will increase, then your learning or experience or the knowledge will be very high, right? So for example, if I give you only one apple, another mango, and I said that this is apple, this is mango. Let us assume supervised learning we are using. Only two data, one is apple, another is mango. Definitely we will learn something. But if say the mango is of green color and say apple is of red color, then based upon only these two instances or data, we may have a misunderstanding that everything which looks like green is mango and everything which looks like red is apple. So the limitation is primarily based upon the size of the data, also the diversity in the data. But if say I give you say hundreds of apples and hundreds of say mangoes with varieties of colors, textures, size, etc., then my learning will be more robust compared to if I give only one apple, another mango. Clear? Once I will get the data, most of the time I may see that data is not in the correct format for taking as an input to any learning algorithm. So the next step is going to be data preparation or data pre-processing. In this pre-processing stage, we may need to clean up something, or we may need to say remove the outlier cases, or we may need to refine the data. So several processing we need to do, which also includes, regarding that we will come into details, but which also includes data balancing. Say for example, if you are given only 2 mangoes and 100 apples, you will learn very good on apples, but very poorly on mangoes. And when it will be combined, then you can see clearly that the ratio of the apple and the mango is very skewed. In the best case scenario, the data must be balanced. So kind of equal portion of different categories or classes must be there, so that the learning is even. So this data preparation or processing also includes that one. We will see that in some application where, say, we do not have more than 2 mangoes, but we have 100 apples, then how to generate more instances of mangoes out of 2? Is there any way out so that I can balance the data, kind of synthetic data creation? Or is it possible that we will reduce some of the apple cases or instances, or we will sacrifice some apple instances so that the ratio will be even? In this case, 2 mangoes and 100 apples, so reducing the number of apples to 2 may not be a good idea. But say if you are given 100 mangoes and 1000 apples, then you may think, okay, I will take 100 mangoes and randomly take 100 apples from the pool of 1000 apples. So those things are taken care of at the second stage, that is called as the data pre-processing or preparation. Also, in that data pre-processing and preparation stage, we divide the total data set into 2 parts. One part will be used for learning purposes. Another part will be used for testing purposes. This is very simple. If I say, consider that corresponding to a course or subject, one question bank is given to you. Okay. Now that is the complete question bank. And if you are teaching that question bank, what you will do, that you will take a part or portion of the questions from the bank to discuss in the class, and other part or other portion you will give in the exam or test. So one part is used for discussion, for assignment, for discussions, for tutorials, to train your students. Another part is used to test your students. So 2 things, training and testing. So at the second stage, mostly we will partition our data into 2 parts, training and testing. Either it will be given as an input, if not, then it is our, who is developing this technique or method is responsibility, that randomly we pick a portion for the training and randomly we pick a portion for the testing. When I say random, if it is not random, if the situation is like you are given simple questions for the tutorial and difficult and hard questions for the test, definitely average result of the class will degrade. If you do the vice versa, then hardly you will get a distribution in the grading. Everybody will get very good marks. Okay, so in one case accuracy is very low, another case accuracy is very high. Either of them is not good. So you have to randomly select so that it will be a kind of mixture of all possibilities. That way you divide training and testing set. Okay. third step is decide about a model. Here is the core of your machine learning algorithm. So what kind of algorithm you are going to use? How will you implement all the features and nitty-gritty of those algorithms in terms of the model? You have to decide. While deciding, definitely you have to consider whether you will go for, say, supervised or unsupervised learning techniques. By this time, when you are at step 3, you know what is your data. You know whether they are labeled or not. You know whether they are balanced or not. Given all those informations, you need to pick up a good model, or you have to decide regarding the selection of a model. That particular model is going to serve your purpose. Okay. Train or build the model. As I mentioned, from the question bank, you randomly picked some questions, a portion, without any loss of generality. Let us assume that you picked, say, 9 portions and kept 1 portion separate for the testing purposes. As you know that the number of questions used for the test is very less compared to the number of questions that we discuss, or the number of topics that we discussed in the class, because class is of, say, 36 hours, whereas the test is for this semester 3 hours, or if you consider mid-sem and end-sem, then also it is for 2 plus 3, 5 hours, very less, right? So the training and building the model will very much depend upon the data set, its collection, preprocessing, preparation, and the kind of model you are selecting. Once the model is developed, then you need to evaluate the model using the test set. While evaluating the model, there will be a list of measures, including accuracy and other measures. I will come to that one. Precision, then sensitivity, retentive sensitivity, specificity, F1 score, MCC, PCC, all those measures are there. So you have to pick a very good measure which can tell that whether your model is good enough or not. If yes, then you will go for the next stage, that is 7th stage, perform predictions. But after the evaluating the model, if you feel that no, my model is not performing good, then what you need to do, the parameters or feature that you have actually, that you have to tune, at this stage. And after tuning that one, although I have mentioned the steps, but if you look for the flow diagram, then it will go back here. Again for training and building. Parameter tuning, then training, building the model, evaluating the model, then come back for the parameter tuning. This way it will keep on moving. Several steps, several number of iterations, it will go on. Very few cases, or exceptionally, you may also think that, okay, let us change this model. So model is not good. Then from here, we will go to here, decide about the model, then come back. But this will happen as a loop, and the number of iteration depends on the accuracy. Or so 2 ways you can stop a loop. So you can either mention at the beginning that, okay, you run for 1000 steps or 100 steps, or you can define one error measure, since you know the what is the it is training, so which means that you know that what is the solution and what is the question in your question bank. Then unless you reach to a particular error value, then you keep on iterating. So 2 conditions, number of steps, say 1000, something like that, 1000 steps, or on error that you mention, that error, say you define an error and error is less than some threshold value. Okay, so either of them are the criteria for your termination of this flow. Now, once it is settled, then at the 7th step, actually, you will go for prediction. And also, you can save this model along with all its features. You can save this model along with all its features so that in future, if a new data come which is not part of your step 1 or 2, then also you can able to predict, and that is the main purpose of your machine learning technique. Okay, some additional steps which can be there is feature engineering. So it is little different than parameter tuning. So in case of parameter tuning, you know the parameters, only its threshold value you are changing or its weightage you are looking at. In case of feature engineering, you may think, okay, this is not enough. So instead of say deciding on the model, so if you feel that I am not able to achieve the required amount of accuracy, even after doing so many number of steps of training and parameter tuning, then you may consider to revise your features, may add some extra features, may reduce some features, and that way basically you can fix your method. Another is the dimensionality reduction. So that is also to some extent related to feature engineering. So dimensionality reduction indicates that, okay, you have say 100 features, or I can consider that each feature is kind of a dimension, so 100 dimensions are there. Now using those 100 dimensions, you are basically reading, I mean learning. Now out of those 100, it might be possible that only few, say 10 to 15, are important and is contributing. Rest of the say 85 to 90 features are not contributing much. But because of their inclusion, probably I am not getting the required prediction accuracy. So you may think that, okay, leave those features and let us focus on these 10 and 15 features, or use these 10 and 15 features. That can be done using dimensionality reduction. That is also a nice part of machine learning technique. Usually it is the PCA, full form is principal component analysis, which is used for this dimensionality reduction. Okay, if time permits, you can request and then I can discuss this PCA. Otherwise, for the timing, I am not discussing this PCA, but it is very interesting part of this machine learning techniques. Okay, so up to this slide, is there any question?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
So when you mentioned balanced data, like when we were like thinking of training the model, that meant like the amount of like the values that you have, that right, for the data pre-processing part. That's what you meant, right?
Regarding the balance, you can think that it should not be more skewed than 40% and 60%. So 50-50 is better always. But if it is not possible, then you should not go beyond say 60% and 40%.
All right, sir. Thank you.
Supervised learning is also called as a task-driven or predict next value kind of a learning technique. As I mentioned, in case of supervised learning, data is known or labeled, and it is directed into some successful execution. So few supervised learning algorithms are like polynomial regression, random forest, linear regression, logistic regression, decision trees, k-nearest neighbors, naive-based algorithms. All are kind of supervised learning algorithms. Okay. Some of them will come and we will discuss them in due course. Few applications of supervised learning algorithms are advertisement popularity, spam classification, face recognition, etc. Let us start with the last one, face recognition. So if you are aware about this, then fine. Otherwise, let me give you a brief introduction. Nowadays, in actually smartphone also, the face recognition feature has been incorporated, and that is going to be one of the security feature for your purpose, that the person who is the user of this mobile, without his uh, uh, face, we will not open. So what it used to do, that first it takes one image or photograph. Now, as you understand, an image is nothing but a two-dimensional matrix. In that two-dimensional matrix, at each cell indicates one pixel position. In that pixel position, there is one integer value which is called as the intensity. Now that intensity varies from, say, mostly from 0 to 255. If it is grayscale image, which means there is no color information. If it is black and white, there are two options. One is 0 white, 0 black, another is 255 white. But if it varies from, say, 0 to 255, then there is a shade, and then we call that as a grayscale image. Okay. Now the third kind, in the color image, corresponding to each matrix cell position, there are three values. One is called red, another green, another blue. So intensity for red, green, and blue. Then you can consider for a color image, there are three matrices. One, say, red color matrix, another green color matrix, third one blue color matrix. So those three matrices, actually, those three matrices is used or is taken as an input first. Then it tries to identify that what is the background. Then it tries to identify what is the skin color. Then it tries to locate two eyes because it's human, one lip, another nose. Based upon that one, it tries to draw the face. I completely agree with you that whether the picture is taken from the front or left side or right side, or say some tilted or some rotated, based upon that one, the figure will vary. That's why we will go for some supervised learning technique. In the supervised learning technique, you can consider, say, 10,000 images are given where the size of the matrix is same for everybody. Out of those 10,000, let us assume, say, 5,000 are the images of a face, and rest 5,000 is images of something else but not human face. Maybe the face of a tiger, maybe the cow, maybe the goat, maybe just a landscape picture or something else. So all those something else is kind of a negative sample, and all those face in the photograph is positive. So labeling is there. That's why it's supervised learning technique. Okay. Now, if you build one model based upon this 10,000 data, it is expected that when another face will come, I mean another photograph of a face will come, you can quickly say, or the model can say, whether it is a human face or not. In order to do that one, again, what I was telling, the versatility and the size of the database is important. So out of the 5,000 database, if you have included all different ages, because you know that if the age grows, then the texture on the skin changes. Also, if you take the photograph across the globe, then the skin color will also change. Then whether the front face is taken or left side, right side is taken, based upon that one will also be there variation. There also be a variation. So considering all those variations, if 5,000 faces are there, then you can quickly classify that one. Now the same example you take that not 5,000, only 50 faces are there, and those are Indian faces. Suddenly, if say some European face will come or Japanese face will come, it might not able to detect that one because the learning was not robust enough. Okay. Next, going for the unsupervised learning, which is called as the data-driven, identify clusters. I do not have the level. So that's why I do not mention anything, but it will be driven by the data. And I need to identify only the clusters. So data is unknown or unlabeled. So few unsupervised learning algorithms like partial least squares, fuzzy means, singular value decomposition, which is also in short called as the SVD, K-means clustering, a priori hierarchical clustering, and this principal component analysis, PCA. In PCA also, which was used for the dimensionality reduction, we may not need that what is the level. So for example, if 3 dimensions are given to you, X, Y, and Z, it's fine. Now, if say 10 dimensions are given to you, how do you mention that dimension? So it's dimension 1, dimension 2, dimension 3, like that. So that means there is not level, there is no level. But you do some analysis, and actually principal and component analysis helps you to reduce the dimensionality. Okay. Of course, another interesting, we'll go into details, is K-means clustering technique. In case of K-means clustering, it is not required or it is not asked that what is the actually the level of the cluster. So for example, here on the right hand side, if I draw, okay, say I have crosses and I have circles. Okay. Now, if this is my data set, and without any loss of generality, I can assume that this data set is nothing but the shape and their position in 2-dimensional space. If it is, then K-means clustering, what it will try to do, so this K indicates the number of the clusters. Usually it is given as an input. If I say K-means clustering, so K equals to 2. So I will try to identify 2 clusters from here. While I will do that one, then definitely from this data, cross and circle, not circle, you can consider this kind of a closed shape and the cross. And if say I have say one more, say like this, so there are 3 different signs. Okay. Now, if I say that 2 means clustering, so I will separate it out into 2 classes, or there will be 2 clusters. Now, looking at the shape, we feel that X and 0, or this closed circle kind of thing, so it varies a lot. The difference is very high compared to this cross and this hyphen kind of thing. So that's why X and this hyphen will go to one class, and this 0 will go to another class, and there will be clustering, some clustering, say something like this. Okay. So this is kind of a hyperplane you can consider. So there is a clustering. Now for doing this one, you need not have to know whether this is a circle, this is actually cross, this is a hyphen or not. So it looks like hyphen, it looks like cross, it looks like circle. Now if I change K from 2 to 3, then for this I may not get, but for this I will get another possibility that there will be another cluster. So this is cluster 1, this is cluster 2, this is cluster 3. So these are the ideal cases. Because of a very good learning, you can segregate that one, right? So that is the k-means clustering. So I am clustering those things. There are several applications for this k-means clusterings also. Few of them are recommender systems, buying habits, grouping user logs, etc. Now regarding this buying habits, say you are a frequent customer in online shopping, Flipkart or Amazon, and you keep on purchasing something. Say I am purchasing clothes, you are also purchasing clothes, but my choice will be different than your choice. And in Amazon, you know that you also observe that one, that there is a huge collection for all the age groups, for almost all the tests, etc. Now, based upon my purchases, it will learn and it will predict that whenever I will go for purchasing clothes, it will suggest me something. Okay, this may be interesting to you, right? Now, grossly, if I divide that, say there are two customers, one is a male, another is female. So female is always looking for, say, frock and say other ladies clothes, and say male is always looking for, say, shirts and pants, etc. Let us assume, okay. If it is so, then when the female will go for shopping, based upon the purchase history, it will keep on, say, recommending you something, that whether you will go for this, you will go for this, you will go for this, like that. Now, if the female changes his buying habits and started to purchase pant and shirt, then it will also recommend from the pant and shirt, right? So those are based upon your buying habits. And the third kind is reinforcement learning, learn from mistakes.
So I have a doubt.
Yes.
So the buying habits part, I don't understand why it's unsupervised, because we do know like what they are buying, right?
Right.
How is
No,
it
at the
on?
beginning, it doesn't have any history, so it may not recommend you correctly. But what they used to do, that they will pick some information regarding you, say from where you are logging in. So definitely, say if you say, for example, I am telling you that Amazon, okay. Now Amazon India is there, Amazon US is there. Whenever you are logging in from, say, Amazon to Amazon India, then their suggestions will be related to India. And also when you logged in, then they can able to see your IP address, and based upon that one, they can locate your location. So based upon that one, it will try to predict something for you. And they will also see that whether their predictions you are accepting or rejecting, you are considering or not. Based upon that one, they will keep on refining. You remember that at the very beginning we said that instead of, and last class also I mentioned, instead of a programmed learning techniques, it is always a good idea that if we extend that learning technique based upon more and more data whenever it will come. Okay, so that way.
All right, so I got it now.
So for reinforcement learning, it learns from the mistakes. It discovers data through a process of trial and error, and then decides what action results in higher rewards. So major component, the agent or learner or decision maker, the environment and the actions. Okay. So here some of you has asked that what is the agent. Agent means the decision maker or the model. Okay, so let us assume that there is one model. Then this model will interact with the environment. And because of that interaction, some reward will be given. So that reward information will come to this guy. I mean the agent, and then agent will take some action based upon this reward. And when it is doing, then you can understand very much. So when it will start from the very beginning, then it will learn from the mistakes. What are the applications? If you look at that one, then it will be clear to you. So first of all, some few reinforcement learning algorithms like Q-learning, state action, reward state action, SARSA, deep Q network, DQN, deep deterministic policy gradient, DDPG, and in the application, first application is video games. So you think about a situation that you are writing a program for video games, and let us assume you are writing a program for chess playing. So in the chess playing, so at the very first step, maybe that you are playing with a kid and you are winning. Then you start playing with a professional chess player. So in one side, there is a system where some reinforcement learning based algorithm is implemented. Another side, there is a human person and you are playing with that. When you are playing, then for each movement by the machine, you are making another movement. If you are a professional chess player, it may be possible that you will succeed or you will do the checkmate. If it is, then the system will learn what went wrong, what are the mistakes. Next time you will play with the system, you will see that he is not making the same mistake. This is learning from the mistake, and also it opens an area for extending the learning process if you do not fix the program. So one situation is that you fix the program. You say that, okay, if this is the move from them, then you go for this move. So you hard coded that one. So you go for this move. Another, okay, if this is the move, then what other possible moves are there? So from all the possible moves, you pick one and you fire that one. You check that whether it leads to a winning situation or losing situation. If it is going to some winning situation, you consider a very huge reward for that one. You save that information with you. But if it is a losing information, then you go back and try to change that move so that next time you will win. Okay, there are some applications in industrial simulations and resource management also. So grossly these three. Now we are going to the algorithms of these techniques. So I will just give the introduction of the algorithms first, and few of them I will discuss in detail. But to inform you that how many algorithms to inform you regarding the existing important machine learning algorithms. So I am giving at least one slide for each algorithm. So regression, it is a supervised algorithm. It aids in predicting a particular numerical value based on a set of prior data. I started with the regression because it is very simple, and knowingly or unknowingly, most of you have used this one. So simple example is the linear regression. In case of linear regression, usually there is an equation y equals to mx plus b. You know that this is the equation of a straight line, right? Equation of straight line, where x and y are the coordinate of a point, m is the slope and b is the intersection, right? The regression, which is the supervised learning, it says that, okay, let us assume there are two different data and we make a plot of that data in a two-dimensional space. So it is going to be a scattered plot. For each point, there is a x and y value. So after making that scattered plot, I will fit a straight line with that data. After fitting that straight line, I will get one equation. So this equation will guide me what will be the future value. Here is an example for you. So this example is taken from protein interaction data. If you look on the left hand side, this side, okay. So along the x-axis, there is one feature, that is interface packing, in short IP. Along the y-axis, there are surface complementarity, which is called as the SC. All the small circles indicate one point, which means there is a huge number of protein complexes. We do not need to know too much about the protein complex. You can consider that as if, say, two rigid body is in a kind of a contact like this. When they are kind of a contact like this, then at this contact surface, we computed two features. One is called as the interface packing, another is called as the surface complementarity. So interface packing I can consider as x coordinate, and surface complementarity I can consider as y coordinate. I put them in a plot, and the plot will be looking like this scatter plot. After having that plot, then I will try to fit a straight line, this straight line, subject to the constraint that the amount of error for this fitting will be less. What is the error? Because when I am drawing this, say, straight line, then for this, say, point, there is a projection on this along the x-axis and along the y-axis. From that projection, I can compute that what is the amount of error, because it is deviated from the straight line. So that way I will try to optimize that error, or minimize the error rather, and I will draw the straight line. If I draw this straight line, then definitely the straight line will have an equation. The equation is given here. So this SC is your y, okay. This 0.6547 is your m, IP is your x, and plus 0.1495 is your b. So you see the equation y equals to mx plus b, the equation of the straight line, right? So all these small circles or points I got from the known contacts of two bodies. Now let us assume that I got one new contact for which, say, I know either x or y but not both. In that case, using this straight line equation, I can predict what will be the value of the others. See, if I get IP or interface packing, then I can predict what will be the value of the surface complementarity, that is the predicted value, and that is linear regression. Right? Now it might not be linear also in nature. On the right hand side in this plot, you see that several energy functions are given: solvation energy, non-bonded energy, along with the interface packing. So here you can see that actually, so although it is showing as a three-dimensional space, but if you take any pair, say non-bonded energy, any, and IP, interface packing, then it will be two-dimensional. If you take solvation energy and non-bonded energy, then it will be two-dimensional. So for the ease of the drawing, so we have drawn it like this, but each is kind of a two-dimensional scatter plot like what is on the left hand side. The difference between left hand side and right hand side is that in the left hand side, I can draw a straight line. On the right hand side, only on the floor, the red dots, that is solvation energy and non-bonded energy. So between them, I can draw the straight line, but say between interface packing and say non-bonded energy, or solvation energy and interface packing, for between all of them, I cannot draw a straight line. Rather, it is a line kind of a not exactly hyperbolic also or parabolic also. It is a polynomial. It is a polynomial actually. I'm fitting polynomial. Now, if I fit the polynomial, then you can understand that. So it will not be y equals to mx plus b. There will be an expression for that polynomial. Nevertheless, if I know one of them, then using that equation of the polynomial, I can able to compute the other values also. So that is what is the regression model. Okay. This is another interesting application of experimental delta delta G. So this delta delta G is called as the change of Gibbs free energy. Change of Gibbs free energy.
So regression doesn't have to be linear per se, right? It can have like polynomials which will give curves.
Pardon?
So like in the past diagram,
Yes, in the last slide.
yeah, so here it's a curve, right? It's not linear.
No,
It's
no,
not like a y is equal to mx plus b equation. So it doesn't have to be linear every time. It can
exactly.
be a curve, right?
Yes, exactly. It may not be linear. Okay. But as I mentioned that here only on the floor, that is solvation energy between and non-bonded energy, between them it is only the linear. Okay. But after that one, it is a polygon. I am fitting that one. So using this polygon also, I can compute that one. So only thing is that the error optimized fitting is required. Okay.
Yes, sir.
So next slide, it is the a plot between experimental delta delta G and predicted delta delta G. So delta delta G indicates change of Gibbs free energy. Okay. So this change of Gibbs free energy is very difficult to predict. Only we have the experimental data on that. And also, it is very difficult to get a data based upon the experiment. Say, for example, if I need, say, 100 such data for the experimental data G, so without knowing too much about biology or the experiment also, then you can consider that doing that experiment for 100 such experimental data G will take some time. But what if I give you one equation of a line, something like that, from where you can predict that value? Then that will be great, right? So with that aim, we are plotting that one where the experimental delta G and the predicted delta G is making a plot. It indicates that it is not perfect. Whatever we will predict is actually not the same as the experimental delta G, but there is a relation. And if you follow this line of equation, then given a new data for which you want the experimental delta G or change of Gibbs free energy, then you first predict on that one using your predicted method. Then you put that value, y value here, and you will get the experimental delta G. Okay. So isn't it nice? So it is probably the very simplest way to do that one, where say without doing the experiment, just by calculating this, it is a very simple math, and you know that it is hardly takes some time. Okay, so not only 100, if I go give you 1 million, then also within a minute you can able to finish up the computation for everybody, right? So that is also an advantage. Classification is also under the category of supervised learning. It predicts or explains a class value. Now, when I say the class value, then usually one class or single class doesn't have any existence. So it starts with the two class classification, where say either it falls in this class or that class, or simply I can say yes or no. Three class may be high, low, none, or class 1, class 2, class 3. Like that way, more classes may come. So that classification I can do. Example application is logistic regression. In logistic regression, it estimates the probability of the occurrence of an event based on one or more inputs. The input here I am talking about is also some probability value. So based upon some probability value, it will output another probability value, that is my output probability. And since it will output one probability value, if I wish to map to that into some classes, say yes or no, high, low, or none, then I must have some sort of thresholds. It is required to map to 3 or multi-class classification. I am giving you one example. Let us assume that, again the same example, apple and mango. Let us assume that somebody says that, okay, so I am not confident, so maybe with 30% probability this is apple, with 40% probability this is mango. And you are taking that probability value and say if you have 100 apples and 100 mangoes, so 100 such probabilities for mangoes and 100 such probabilities for apple. Using that one, you are computing one probability. One model is there, and that model, when you will give one probability, based upon that one will output another probability value, right? Say without any loss of generality, let us assume the probability it outputs 0.6. Then the question is, okay, this is probability, but I want to know that whether it's an apple or it's a mango. So in order to know whether it's an apple or mango, then you have to mention, okay, if say it is greater than 0.5, then it is apple, else it is mango. So one threshold value, that threshold here is 0.5 is required. If it is a kind of a yes class or no class, then also, so if it is say greater than 0.5 probability, output probability, then it is yes, otherwise no. So some thresholding is required, but we can do the classification. And if say instead of 0.5, you can have say different thresholds, mostly in fuzzy application, we can do that one. Say from 0 to 0.3 indicates that it is class of mango. From 0.3 to 0.7, it indicates class of apple. 0.7 to 1.0 indicates it is class of any other fruits, but not mango or apple. You can do that one, right? So that is the application of the classification.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
Sir, in the last slide it was written like 2-class classification and 3-class classification. Can we have high number of classes?
Yes,
like
yes.
50, 100.
Yes, yes.
Is it possible?
Yeah, that's why I mentioned more. I didn't write all. And if you read this last line, hence thresholding is required to map to 2 or 3 or multi-class classification. So this more is multi-class.
Sir, is
But
it feasible? Like we are doing 2-class classification, 3-class classification, and if we do like 100-class classification, will it be very much accurate? If
that depends. That depends. That's up to you. So if you are doing say 100-class classification and your data set is 100 itself, so you can understand that that is not correct. And when you say that 100-class classification, since the output is the probability which varies from 0 to say 1, then that 0 to 1 probability will be divided into 100 different parts. So do you think that that is a very good idea to do that one? I don't think so, right?
No, sir.
Instead, what you can do, so it is not in my slide, but so what you can do, you can go for hierarchical classification. So at the first level, you say divide in them into say 3 or 4 classes, and within that each class you further go
Subdivide.
go for another classes. That way, if you go, then every time you divide, your total probability will vary from 0 to 1, and you have to classify into hardly say 3 or 4 classes.
Yes.
Right? That way, at the end, what you can have 100 classes, but you went by hierarchical classification, not in one go, right?
Okay, sir. Thank you.
So those kind of improvisation you can always do, and definitely you have to do, and that will make why you are unique, why you are different in terms of your algorithm actually from rest of the other people. Okay. So clustering is kind of unsupervised learning. So I demonstrated that using circle, cross, and hyphen. Cluster group the data based on characteristics. Example is k-means. I mentioned that k-means in detail. In the dimensionality reduction, so one very good application is principal component analysis, in short PCA, as I mentioned. So right now we do not have any plan for it, but if required and time permits, I can have one lecture on this principal component analysis. So it helps to reduce the dimensionality, and it helps to identify that what is the importance of the of each feature or dimension by doing eigenvalue analysis. This ensemble method is very interesting, and nowadays it is gaining up the momentum. Ensemble method combines several predictive models. Yes?
Sir? Sir, means from 12, sir, another class is there. Means can we, sir, stop?
Okay, fine. So we can continue on tomorrow. So tomorrow we'll start at 9. Okay.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other question?
Sir, I have a question.
Sure.
Sir, for
All those who has a
phylogenetic,
class can leave if they wish.
sir, if
Thank you, sir.
I want to draw some phylogenetic tree, then which method will be best for like which one should we use?
So
like K means clustering.
in phylogenetic tree, what they used to do, that they used to do for classification. Okay, and if you look at the tree structure, every time they divide into two parts, and then they also consider the depth in the phylogenetic tree. Okay, so the clustering or the classification you consider, so that is done hierarchical based and one after another.
Okay, sir.
Any other question? Okay, thank you. We will continue on the next class. We will start tomorrow at